Hi, and welcome to Understanding. I'm Craig Biddle. Today we're going to continue in my series on what is faith. Today we're going to hear from William Lane Craig, who is a Christian apologist, and we'll dive right into his view of what faith is.
This came from an opinion piece in the Los Angeles Times a number of years ago. It's an engineering professor from the University of Southern California. His name is Bart Costco, and back when the United States was, they were talking about funding faith programs through the government, and this guy got in a huff, and he wanted to give us a little bit of a lecture on faith. And he says, look, you got to understand something. Faith, and here's his definition, is unwarranted belief. Faith is belief without evidence or despite evidence to the contrary. Faith occurs when a person believes that something is true even though he suspects it's false. It takes large doses of such faith to support the very existence of casinos, psychic hotlines, astrology columns, mall Santas, and most organized religions. Do you see a problem with the way we use the word faith in the church?
Well, frankly, no, Craig. I think I see a problem in the way the atheist community uses the word faith. That is the definition in my interaction with unbelievers that many of them have, is they think that faith is believing something that you really know isn't true, and that somehow you believe it anyway. And this is simply not the way believers use the word faith.
So this is not the way that believers use the word faith. Well, it's certainly not the way that believers typically define the word faith, because if you define the word faith as acceptance of ideas in the absence of evidence or in defiance of evidence or the like, then it sounds ridiculous that you would use that as a means of knowledge. What religious people want to do, and we've seen this in other episodes of this series, and we're seeing it here again with William Lane Craig, is they want to claim that faith is just trust or confidence. But here we're going to hear trust in something, but then trust in what? And why do we need the word faith if it just means trust? So let's see where he goes with this. But bear in mind that when we're talking about religious faith, and when people use the concept of faith in a religious context and say, look, to believe in God, you have to have faith, that means something other than you have to go by the evidence that exists for the existence of God. I mean, if there was evidence for the existence of God, then you would accept God's existence on the basis of reason. So the business of trying to use faith in both ways is sometimes they use it as a package deal where the single term literally is taken to mean both things: acceptance of faith in the absence of evidence, acceptance of ideas in the absence of evidence, and just trust. And then sometimes it's used equivocally within an argument or within a discussion. And both of these are fallacies. And faith in a religious context means either that you accept things on the basis of evidence, in which case we don't need the term because we already have a term for that reason, or you accept ideas in the absence of evidence or in defiance of evidence. That's what the concept of faith means. So kudos to Bart Costco for getting this essentially correct. Let's see what William Lane Craig does with it from here.
I think the best definition I heard of faith is trusting in what you have good reason to think is true.
Trusting in what you have good reason to think is true. Well, if you have good reason to think something is true, what does that mean? It means there's some degree of evidence to support the idea. There's some degree of evidence that connects the idea or appears to connect the idea to reality. And if you have some degree of evidence and you base your trust in this idea being true on that evidence, then you are going by reason. Now, this doesn't mean that you are certain the idea is true. There are degrees of evidence, and there are various terms that we use for degrees of evidence. If there's a little bit of evidence, something is possible. If there's a great deal of evidence, something is probable. If there's conclusive evidence and nothing to suggest that this idea is wrong, then that's grounds for calling this thing certain. But even a certainty can be wrong. You can have a mountain of evidence for something and no evidence to suggest otherwise. And sometimes you can be wrong about that. So that's why certainty is different from knowledge. You can be certain about something and wrong, but you can't know something and be wrong. You can't know what isn't so. So all of this is really important philosophically, and all of this is just completely lost on these apologists and other religionists who try to claim that using the concept of faith is just like using the concept of trust when you have good reason to believe that something is so. No, when you have good reason to believe that something is so, that means there's significant amount of evidence, and you're going by evidence, and which means you're going by reason. So he's trying to have his faith to mean one thing and have it to mean another thing too, because of course, these guys do not take the position that, well, look, here's the evidence for God's existence, and so we don't need faith at all. They say you do need faith, and the reason they say you do need faith is because they know there's no evidence for God, and they want you to accept his existence nonetheless.
Faith is trusting in that which you have good reason to think is true. And there's no conflict in that case between reason and faith.
Yeah, there's no conflict in that definition between reason and faith because they're the same concept. There's either we need these two different concepts or we only need one. And if we only need one, we have reason to capture the act of accepting ideas when there's evidence to support them. Look, just as we don't say, look, the concept of miracle means that a thing is acting in accordance with its nature, right? If you see a fish swimming in water, you don't say, oh, look, a miracle, the fish is swimming in water. We have the concept miracle. Why? Because some people claim that things happen in which a thing acts in contradiction to its nature. So, for instance, a stick turns into a snake, or a woman turns into a pillar of salt, right? And these are Old Testament miracles. The reason we need the concept of miracle is to capture these kinds of claims. Now, of course, things can't act in contradiction to their natures. They can't act in contradiction to their identities. The law of causality holds that things act and can act only in accordance with their natures. So miracles are out just on a fundamental philosophic level. And faith, just like miracles, the concept miracle does not mean that something is acting in accordance with its nature. It means it's acting in contradiction to its nature. So too, faith does not mean that you're accepting ideas on the basis of evidence. We have a concept for that, and we don't need to. This is a huge package deal that he's trying to get you to accept. And the package deal is that faith means essentially the same thing as reason. So he's packaging those together in this particular package deal. And that doesn't make any sense at all. We need these concepts to be kept separate because they mean different things when we're trying to think about what's going on in our own minds and when we're having conversations with other people.
Anyone can define words how he wants. So if that's what the unbeliever wants to talk about faith, then I'll say, well, then what I'm talking about is shmaith. And I have shmaith in God, which is trusting in what I have good reason to believe in true. And I don't have what you mean by faith.
This is funny. If that's what he means by faith, I'll say I mean shmaith in God, which means that you have good reason to believe in him. Well, we don't need the concept of shmaith either, because we already have a concept that captures acceptance of ideas on the basis of evidence. And again, that concept is reason. So this is just a really dishonest approach to trying to defend the idea that faith is just this natural thing that you use, naturally good concept that you use all the time, and you may as well just accept it. And then after they get you to buy into this idea that faith is a perfectly legitimate concept and you use it all the time one way or another, Then they're going to try to get you to accept the existence of God on the basis of zero evidence. And that they need you to accept on the basis of genuine faith, which is the acceptance of ideas or the existence of things in the absence of evidence to support them. That is what's going on here. So this is a huge problem for people who are trying to wrestle with this business of religion, especially a lot of young people, because they get looped into this nonsense when they're children, when they're toddlers sometimes, and they get sent to Sunday school where they're told of this stuff. They get told that they're going to burn in hell by certain denominations in Christianity if they don't, toe the line and say that they believe, whether they do or not. So it's a really, really nasty game that these guys play. And calling it a game is really wrong because it's not a game. It's a matter of life and death. And these SOBs get away with this on the basis of these kinds of equivocations and package deals. And it's really important to understand this so that you can catch them doing it, call them out for doing it, and keep these very different concepts separated in your own mind so that you know what you're thinking about and you know what you're talking about when these kinds of conversations go down. If you know of other videos where a professional religionist is trying to claim that faith does not mean acceptance of ideas in the absence of evidence, please send it to me because I want to keep this series going as long as I can keep tagging these guys and pointing out that this is what they're doing. I'll continue to make these short videos to this effect.
You just get into a word game in that case. The point is we're not using words with the same meaning. We're not talking the same vocabulary. And so in his sense of faith, I reject that.
Yeah, if you're going to use faith to mean the same thing as reason, then we're not using the same vocabulary, and we're not using a sensible vocabulary if we are going to treat those things as being the same thing. We need these two concepts. They're important concepts, reason and faith, and they mean different things, especially in a religious context. Now, again, some people use faith to mean the equivalent of trust in sort of common parlance. And that's fine. I prefer that people would just use the word trust there because it's more precise, more accurate, and less confusing. But in a religious context, when religious people are talking about faith, what they mean ultimately and what they're going to count on the meaning of faith to be is acceptance of ideas as true in the absence of evidence to support them. So keep your eye on these and let me know if you have another instance of someone using faith in this way. It's got to be a major, professional religionist of some sort or a theologian. Otherwise, I wouldn't want to do it. But if you see one or hear of one, send it my way and maybe I'll do another video on that. Thanks, and I'll see you next time on Understanding. In the meantime, keep using your mind and loving your life.